Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister ISHIBA is entering the room. Please welcome him with a warm round of applause. Prime Minister ISHIBA Shigeru would like to deliver a remark.
Good evening. I'm Shigeru Ishiba, the Prime Minister of Japan. I do not confuse you with my poor English, so let me speak in Japanese. Allow me to offer my heartfelt congratulations on the 6th Tokyo Global Dialogue. I am delighted to have been invited to this gathering of global wisdom. I was told that the theme of TGD6 is a quest for global resilience, which means the ability to overcome difficulties and recover, as well as the ability to adapt to change, which is exactly what we need today. Today, Russia is the invasion of Ukraine, the confused situation in the Middle East, and severe security environment in Northeast Asia, including North Korea's nuclear and missile activities. The world is facing harsh realities, but these are not isolated incidents, but they are intricately intertwined with each other, making our future more difficult to predict. I would like to share my thought on what role Japan can play as the balance of power in the region undergoes historic change. It's essential to fully strengthen deterrence while soberly assessing the current situation so that imbalance of power does not lead to the risk of disabilities. Based on the national security strategy, we must fundamentally strengthen our defense capabilities and work to promote the transfer of defense equipment and OSA. And we need to strengthen Japan-US alliance and expand and deepen our cooperation with our allies and like-minded countries. At the same time, it's vitally important to maintain close communication with the communities and countries concerned to avoid any miscalculation.
In the United States this month, the second Trump administration assumed office. I hope to hold a Japan-US summit with the President Trump at the earliest opportunity. My goal is to engage in candid discussions, foster a strong relationship of trust and collaboration, thereby elevating the alliance to new heights. We must also build a multi-layered regional security network encompassing frameworks such as Japan, US, Australia, India to ensure FOIP. Especially, stable economic growth needs to be achieved so that the strategic nexus between the Indian and Pacific Oceans can be ensured. In line with this vision, on my first bilateral overseas trip as Prime Minister, I visited Malaysia and Indonesia this month. During my meetings with Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar and Indonesian President Prabowo, we agreed to advance tangible cooperation in security and energy sectors. Equally important are our relations with neighboring countries. We must ensure that China's stable development benefits the entire region. With President Xi, I reaffirmed our commitment to comprehensively promote a strategic and reciprocal relationship and build a constructive and stable relationship. We will continue to communicate closely with China in pursuit of these goals at the summit and all other levels. Furthermore, under the current strategic landscape, Japan-ROK relations remain indispensable, including the cooperation in dealing with North Korea. We will work closely with the frameworks of Japan-ROK and Japan-US ROK cooperation. As I mentioned at the outset, the world is facing unprecedented uncertainty. History has shown us, however, that many of the world's leading think tanks emerged and thrived during pivotal moments of great challenge. The key question is how the international community can strengthen its resilience and overcome today's crisis. I firmly believe that the discussions at the Tokyo Global Dialogue will provide valuable insights for policymakers, including myself. With this, I would like to close my remarks, as has been prepared. It was a very good policy speech. This is not a policy statement, but I was in the plenary session with both chambers, and I made very similar points That is why I would like to make sure that I do not deviate from the speech script. It's my 40th anniversary of my career as a politician. I have been politician for very long. Former Prime Minister Aso and Mr. Nukaga or Mr. Funada Hajime, these are one of the handful policy makers who have had longer career as politicians. Heads of DoD as well as Minister of MAFF, I have assumed many positions. I also have had lots of diplomatic opportunities as well. And I also have led many diplomatic delegations. Back then, it was Tanaka Makiko who was at the leading post. I also served as the Secretary General of the Diplomatic Policy Research Council. So this isn't the area that I am not knowledgeable about. But talking of recent developments, I have been thinking a lot about what United Nations is. The reason I said United Nations is because the translation of the United Nations in Japanese is Kokusai Rengo, as if it is a body of international government. However, United Nations is not a body of international government. It is a group of sovereign countries. In China, that use same kanji characters, at news conferences, they say United Nations in their kanjis. At World War II, against the Axis countries, that it has been a group of countries that stood up against the country of Axis. And these are the countries that have fought against Japan, and that was one of the requirements for countries to be the member of the United Nations. And I'm not saying any pros or cons of the United Nations, but that has been where the United Nations was coming from at Suez crisis. What role did it play, or what role did it play in the turmoil of Hungary? All these needs to be reviewed and re-examined going forward. There are certain dysfunctionalities on the part of United Nations, and now what do we have to do? We have in this room with the ambassador of the Japanese delegation to the United Nations, but this is a very important question.
And this year marks 80th anniversary of the defeat by Japan of the World War II. I say since 80 years since the defeat. If I say end of the war, it may not represent the essence of the situation. I was a bureaucrat in charge of domestic affairs. In Sumatra, I was in charge of colony affairs. My father, correction. And he came back to Japan after that. And he was in charge of someone who is working with the Ministry of Construction, in charge of reconstruction from the war defeat. And he became the Secretary General in charge of the construction affairs. Document from the offices back then had a custom of saying so and so many years after the end of the war to indicate how many year in calendar. But he said that it has to be expressed in such a way that so and so years since the end of the war, but my father insisted that it has to be expressed as so and so years after the defeat of the war in order not to misunderstand the essence of the war. Why Japan waged war? There was no word such as GDP back then, but USA had 8 times more GDP back then vis-a-vis Japan. Automotive production, the size of the production of the US was 100 times more than that of Japan. But why Japan declared war and why Japan could not stop in the middle of the war, we need to revisit and analyze. I think that is quite important for Japan to do, and I still believe it. When Mr. Tanaka Kakue was there, so long as people who fought in the war are still in charge of politics, then Japan should be okay. But if people who fought the war would leave the government, then Japan would be in trouble. And therefore, we need to study and learn hard. And that's what Mr. Kakue Tanaka said when he was a prime minister. I think the youngest of the war people with the experience is more than 100 years of age, who joined the war at the age of 15. But many of the people who had experience of the war have left the center of the economic activities and political activities, and therefore it's a time for us to revisit and review the war experience at this point in time. The past Watanabe Tsuneo, he said a lot about Yasukuni Shrine. There are many things I concur with him. Modern and current history, I think it's a very good time for us to study about modern and current history. So how United Nations ought to be in the future. This is to be considered the backdrop of many things. And what is the eastward expansion of NATO? What was it? After the war, the Cold War was ended, Hungary joined NATO. What was the significance of that? I actually went to Hungary to study about that for a week or so. And also, what is the civilian control of Germany and what was meant to be civilian control in Germany? I also went to Germany for a week or so to study about that. Germany stopped doing that, but they had the conscription system. Why? When I asked, he said that in order not to create any system that is like Nazis any further. And that was heard from many people when I interviewed. In other words, before being a warrior, we need to be a civilian and citizen, and that was the thinking behind. They joined a collective defense system of NATO, but they are not going to exercise individual defense. That they consider to be national interest, which is conversely speaking opposite to Japan. And how are we going to understand NATO's eastward expansion? Why Russia invaded Ukraine? What was the Budapest Agreement? And the extended deterrence, is it working? In order for that to function, what sort of efforts do we need? Those may not win me votes, but those are the things we really have to squarely face. I think there are many questions to be raised.
As the Prime Minister of Japan, I am not in a position to give you a definitive answer to these questions. However, we need to try to find answers to these questions. Otherwise, Japan cannot contribute to the realization of peace in the world. So these are the thoughts that I have had, and it was not really a vent that I was going to take, and I am not intended to make any definitive comments. But these are equally very important. How to position oneself in the world And these are the questions that we need to pose ourselves, and we don't have luxury of time. Working closely with you, we need to create a world with more peace. And I hope that the next generation will be the time free of confrontation. And with this, I would like to close my remarks. And thank you very much for your close attention. Prime Minister ISHIBA, thank you very much for your speech. Please remain seated as we send off Prime Minister ISHIBA out of this room. お父さんがない。Prime Minister, thank you very much for your presence. Another round of warm applause is in order. Prime Minister ISHIBA, thank you very much for your attendance. Yet another round of warm applause is on order.